Hey guys, welcome to podcast 118. This is the first of 3 podcasts on the topic of addiction. Let's just jump right into this podcast and say it is not PG-13 or below. Kacey, I think we're going to hear some things that might be rated above that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so bear with us as we share our stories with you. And I'm going to give Kacey a grace card as we tell the story because a natural component of telling a story of trauma is the act of reliving the trauma. And I certainly don't want you to relive the trauma, but you have a passion to tell this story. It has made a difference in the lives of others, and I think you're more than willing to light us up like Christmas trees and tell us what really happened.
Yeah, totally. I think that over the years, God has given me a certain amount of healing, and it's like that onion, like peeling away that onion.
Right.
As I get some healing, God says, okay, now let's go a little deeper.
So today is layer 37 or something like that. All right, so let's just jump into this. Tell me a little bit about your family of origin. And I said a little bit on purpose.
Okay. Well, I was born in Tillamook, Oregon, and which is a farming community. And I never knew my real father. Never met him, so it was like my mom got pregnant when she was 14 and had me at 15, and it was like a one-night stand with that guy.
Sure. So one of the things I learned in school was that oftentimes you can hear the first paragraph of a person's life story and kind of predict the outcome. So as we keep going through this, do you feel that you're like a statistic there?
Definitely do.
Yeah. So let's fast forward a little bit because what you shared right there was a lot, and we could, as I shared with you before we started the show, we could probably go on and on. But let's fast forward a moment or two. Your mother obviously had issues, but you told me a story before we did this, albeit in writing. But we had this. We started the conversation about your first memories or your first credible memories of time you spent with your second father and drug stuff. Yeah. So tell us that story about what you remember about your second father, your second stepfather and drugs.
Well, I think it was probably as early as even first grade. I remember going into a school in first grade, and then a year goes by, and I have to redo school again because during that 1 year, we had to move to 5 different places because we couldn't make ends meet because they were spending all their money. My parents were spending all their money on drugs.
So back then, did you call that drugs where the money was going? Did you what name did you have for it?
Yeah, I didn't know it was for. I didn't really have a name for it.
What drug was it?
It was heroin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did see them shoot up, and I saw the bent spoon and the needles.
Sure.
And so.
Where were you when you saw it?
In the living room.
Okay.
And
so they did that. So they were doing it right in front of you guys.
They were at the kitchen table.
And how many of you were in the room? How many kids were in the room?
My sister and I.
So there was 2 of you.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you see them shoot up heroin, and it creates something in your mind. What got created?
I think that probably the best thing, or the thing that really got created in my mind when I first saw that was, well, this must be acceptable.
Sure.
That it's okay to do this in your home. So I thought it was okay. I thought it was something that was normal.
Sure.
For our family, it was normal to see that and do that.
So since you've obviously told components of this story before, and granted this is going to be a longer storytelling, what else do you remember going on in the home at that time that you thought was normal, but in retrospect it wasn't anything but?
Well, my mom, even though I had a stepdad, he wasn't always around. And when he wasn't around, other guys would be in the house.
Yeah.
And
what do you mean there were other guys in the house?
Like friends, like even a second cousin that would come over just to Well, I could hear the noise in the bedroom at night.
So the noise meaning they're having sex.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I could hear that at night. And so that's probably my first exposure really to hearing and not really knowing what they're doing, but I could hear what's
Sure.
going on.
And it was a rotation of guys, you're saying?
Yes, it was. My mom was.
Did your stepfather know? Or don't you even think he cared? Or
I don't think he cared. And I mean, he was my stepfather, but they weren't married. So.
Okay. So just kind of a perspective sake, because when you paint a picture, it's tempting to look at certain parts of the picture, but let's go back to the frame of the picture for a second here. So walk me through your siblings and your best memories of, before you became adopted later, which is how you got your last name. Go through that amalgam of accumulation of brothers and sisters and stuff.
Well, my sister was born in Puerto Rico.
This is your oldest sister?
My younger sister.
The one that's closest to you in age, though?
Yes.
Okay.
She's 2 years younger. And she grew up, she was born in Puerto Rico and grew up in Puerto Rico for the first couple of years of her life.
Okay.
And then we moved back to Oregon.
Okay.
In the States. And I remember one time when my third stepdad was involved, we lived in Utah. And I remember this traumatic time in my life when we were living in an apartment. It was probably the third story apartment. And my sister somehow got outside the rail. And there was a point where I had to grab her or she would have fell down a story and landed on stairs. And that was, when I think about that time, that was a unique situation where I was able to save her. That was just a strange happening. I was screaming and yelling and holding her with one hand, and finally somebody came out and grabbed her and yanked her up. But that was pretty traumatic, actually.
Is that your part of your personality today, the rescuer type?
Yes.
Totally. And you think it started right then?
Yeah, I definitely did.
And how old was she when that happened?
4 or 5.
Okay, so very young. Does she remember it?
No, I don't think she does.
Probably a good thing, huh?
Yeah.
All right, so we got the next younger sister. Go through the next amalgam.
Well, I don't have any other sisters except for adopted sister.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then an adopted brother. But that was later on when I was 13.
I see. So you had a couple of events of significance, and I'm staring at my notes here as best as I can since there are so many of my notes here. So the whole point of this is to get to a place where we're talking about either or potentially both drug addiction and sexual addiction. So let's jump forward to the sexual addiction side of you. So you're telling me you told me earlier that there was a time when you lived in a single wide mobile home and you shared a room with your sisters. So talk about early onset exposure to sexual addiction that relates to that story.
Well, in that scenario, we had just moved from Portland, Oregon to Gillette, Wyoming. And it was mainly to escape the law. My mom and dad had done an armed robbery in Oregon and then proceeded to go to Gillette, Wyoming to stay with friends and family. And but in this home, the law caught up with my stepdad and put him in jail for drug charges and for the armed robbery as well. And but my mom, she was absent that day that they came and got my dad. So, but she came back and then left us with my sister's real dad, who had left when I was 4. And he already had another wife and his girls, but we were staying with them just as a place to stay.
Sure.
And
so not a family.
Not a family.
Just lodging.
Yeah, just lodging, basically. And but my mom, she, well, let me just back up a minute. In staying,
Yeah, this is a convoluted story, so it's okay if you back up some.
Okay. In staying there, there was four girls that they had, plus my sister, so 5. And then I was the 6th person living in one bedroom. And, you know,
I can't imagine.
Their ages ranged.
And you're 9 at the time, right?
I was 8 at
8,
the
so
time.
elementary school.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was in elementary school, and the ages ranged from 3 to 12. I was 8. The oldest girl was 12. Another girl was 10.
Anybody in puberty in this group?
No. Everyone was 12 or under.
Okay.
And but I do remember with all my all the girls playing Spin the Bottle and Truth or Dare. I remember doing that. And
So somebody in that group learned that game from
Yeah.
somebody older than them, and they decided it was okay if
the
a
12-year-old,
bunch of elementary, middle school kids played that.
yeah, the 12-year-old girl actually initiated the game with all of us younger kids doing the Spin the Bottle.
Right. So did you ever have any intimate anythings with her?
The Truth or Dare was like, touch me here, you know, and
So yes.
yes, we did play around and curiosity, you know.
Isn't it amazing how that still affects us?
Yeah.
Because I'm watching your body language as you tell the story, and we're like, what, a third of a century removed, plus or minus, right?
Yeah.
And you're still having a reaction to it. That's the thing about sexual addiction. It's just so, these dendrites are so thick. It's like the ultimate oak tree. You know how deep it can go. So it's almost like I feel like the next best thing to do is to let you just kind of go with this component of the conversation. So you leave this environment, and there's magic that occurs throughout the course of the foster system, right? And eventually you end up getting adopted.
Yes.
So go through that build up to getting adopted.
Well, we were staying in that single wide trailer in Wyoming, and one day my mother decided that she was going to go look for work. Well, she looked for work, and a day went by, 2 days went by, a week went by, a month went by, and she never came back. So, you know, rejection, abandonment, that's what I was feeling at the time. And
Can't imagine.
somehow my grandparents found out about us, that we were in this home, no mom, no dad, really, just people watching us, which was my sister's real dad and his wife. And there was some situations in that house that made it really bad for me. Like I remember, just to go on the story a little bit, I remember saying at the bus stop, we were waiting at the bus stop, and I remember saying the F word one time, and one of the sisters told on me, and
Told who, your sister's father?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and when he got home from work, he proceeded to discipline me with a leather strap
Sure.
and 30 lashings.
30 for use of the F word one time.
Yes, on my butt and my legs bare, and I couldn't walk the next day. I was really distraught from that. I mean, I didn't know what I was feeling.
And how old are you at this time still?
I'm still 8.
Okay.
But somehow my grandparents found out about it and sent for us. So my sister and I, alone, flew from Gillette, Wyoming to Cheyenne, Wyoming, then flew from Cheyenne to Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And we stayed with our grandparents for around 6 months.
Okay.
And
What was
then-
that like? 6 months of a household where you actually knew the people?
That was actually pretty nice. It was actually, I love my grandma and grandpa, and they just really nurtured us and taught us about just being thankful for what we have. And but still, I'm 8, 9 years old, you know, so I don't know all this stuff. And God is just.
But you had a stable school. You knew you were getting where your food was coming from. You had laundry being done.
Yeah.
You had a bed that was yours. Right. So that's a massive upgrade. We take all that for granted, but for you, that was an upgrade.
Yeah, that's right. And
So you had 6 months there.
6 months there, yeah. And then we moved to, my sister and I got separated, and she went to my aunt in Tillamook, and I went to my uncle in Tillamook, 2 different families. And I stayed with them till I was 9.5 or so. And that's when actually my Aunt Lucy led me to Jesus for the first time.
So this was your first time of any kind of spiritual anything?
Yeah, I mean, they went to church every Sunday, you know, and it was this old Baptist church, but still, they sang songs and worshiped Jesus, and she's the one that introduced me to Jesus.
At 9.5, and you got it? You understood that?
At 9. Yeah, I mean, I understood most of it, but I didn't really live it, you know, at the time, but because I moved out of there and went to foster care. And
So the woman introduces you, and then all of a sudden you're in foster care. That sounds disconnected.
yeah,
You would think, right? Because Christianity gets this label as all conditioning love, all knowing, all things that these labels get bolted upon Christians. Oh, by the way, they're human.
yeah.
Well, life goes on, and
They already, you know, my uncle had 4 kids of his own.
were they all in the house with you?
Yeah, they're all in the house, and I was in the room with my 2 cousins, my brother, male cousins, and you know, it was a good time, good learning season. But I tell you, my cousins were rascals.
That is such a polite word. It has historically means bad,
yes.
but today we consider it to just be fun, carefree.
It was one of those times, and they're older cousins than me, you know, and I remember one time just being out by the barn. I had to go to the bathroom, and they just told me, "Oh, just go over there by the corner of the barn, go bathroom by the fence." And they didn't tell me it was an electric fence.
Oh no!
Yeah, so they were rascals, but they were farmers, you know, and
At their core.
had cattle and had chickens and had pigs, and so every morning we were up early.
Sure.
You know, doing chores and stuff like that. So I learned a lot being with them.
Cool.
But they couldn't. The other place that my sister was staying at with my aunt, something happened there, and she had to come and live with my aunt, and that was just too many. So
Sure.
at the time, and they had too much.
So they had to sort of clean up shop to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So it was like a business decision in a sense too.
So in actuality, we actually went back to my grandparents for a few months, and then that's when we got put in the foster care system. But during that time that we were at my grandparents', my grandma and grandpa said, "Your mom might be able to get you back, but she would have to come back here to Oregon to serve a year in jail."
So they told you this like they needed your input, or is this just more of a notification?
This was a notification that, you know what, your mom can come and get you back, but she has to serve some time in prison for the armed robbery. And
There's a little bit of Christian theme there,
yeah,
and some penance and what goes with it. So let's jump into the foster care conversation. There are multiple podcasts that talk about failed government ideas that start with truly honorable intention, right?
yeah,
I mean, we're commanded thousands of years ago to, you know, take care of the sheep, you know, equip the saints. You know, we have lots of biblical references that we're supposed to do things like the foster care system does. The foster care system is a different animal than what's described in the Bible, though. So cover your time in foster care. I think that's a significant story that there's no way people can understand enough what that means.
yeah.
It's like trying to summarize marriage in 2 sentences or less.
The first foster care that we went into was this older couple, and they used to be in Hollywood. I mean, they were dancers.
Okay, all right.
Like they danced.
So they're entertainers. Okay.
Yeah, they danced with Fred Astaire and some of those other people, and they were stars. You know, that
Okay.
was their stage name. Their last name was Star.
Okay.
So they took us in, and they were in their 50s, and they were okay, but the lady was just very controlling, and I found that out because of what she would make me eat.
Which was?
Rutabaga soup. Have you ever had rutabaga soup?
I don't know if I could spell rutabaga, let alone have the soup from the animal, the critter.
And
it's not a critter; it's a vegetable.
And salads and stuff like that, And I never got a taste for salad.
Sure.
And so I would find myself taking a bite of salad and then, taking it out
there
of my
you
mouth,
go.
putting it in my pocket, and then going to the bathroom and letting it out there. So
Sure.
And but they just we were just not having. We were going to this elementary school, my sister and I, William Clark Elementary, and I was in 5th grade, and my sister was in 3rd grade, and that time during that foster care was just okay. It wasn't. I didn't really care for the people that much. They just met our basic needs. They didn't go above and beyond.
So they didn't attempt to love you per se.
I didn't feel that. No.
Sure.
No. And but we knew a couple people. I was in a 4th and 5th grade split class with a guy named Joey, and my sister was in the same class as Amy in 3rd grade, and they were both Keevers. And so my sister had written a letter about her situation in foster care and that she was not feeling loved and all this stuff. And it was something that Amy found out about somehow. And it was actually sent to the principal. Because there was a concern there in this foster home. So
part of that is legal. You have to report instances where you feel a child's welfare is in jeopardy. A teacher might have saw that, and he might have been legally, or she might have been legally compelled to turn that into the principal.
Yeah. So, and I'm not positive that anything was going on there.
Have you ever seen the letter?
Home. I haven't seen the letter, but my sister told me about it after, years later. And that's how the Keevers found out about us.
And therefore your last name.
From their kids. And
so they adopted you.
Well, we went into foster care with the Keevers. We moved to the Keevers.
Okay.
In 4th and 5th grade. I was in 5th grade. My sister was in 3rd. And we were in foster care with them. But man, I'll tell you, my sister Vicky and my adopted brother, or my foster brother Joey, did not get along at all. They were just at each other all the time.
Still true?
No, not
good.
Anymore. It's a fairly good relationship now. But fast forward probably 2 years, it just wasn't working. My brother and my sister, my foster brother and my sister, were just at each other so much that they decided it'd be better for us to move to another foster home. So, but this time it didn't work for us to be at the same home. All up to this point, except for a brief moment at our cousin's house and our aunts and uncles, we were together, my sister and I. And
so that was kind of your stabilizing force for that first window of life.
Yeah, I mean, that was
it certainly wasn't your parents.
That was my life, was to watch over my sister.
Sure, understood.
And to help her. And so that was pretty much what was going on in my life. But at that time, I went to another foster home, and my sister went to a foster home that was quite a ways away from me. And so, we could never visit because she was just, hours away from me in the same state, but, way away.
Understood.
But in this foster home, I got in some trouble.
What does that mean?
Well, I had, while I was in foster care at the Keever's house, my sisters both read 17 magazine. And that's where I picked up looking at girls in swimsuits and stuff like that.
Sure.
And actually, that's when I was probably 11, 12 years
So
old.
softcore
Yeah.
pornography.
But I would I'd fantasize about it. And that's when I started masturbating at that time.
Sure. How old were you for perspective's sake?
11.
Okay. So I'm going to hit you with that. How old were you all the time? Because the listeners have to put together this jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, right.
So that's a good one to have. Name, location, age, names of people around you. Those always help.
Yeah. So that's when I actually started my
Sexual
addiction.
Yeah, sure.
Was when I was 11. And so going back to this other foster home, the parents they were just kind of similar to the stars. They were just kind of watching over me and not really, loving me at all.
Nurturing wasn't happening.
No, it wasn't that. So,
More like bumpers in a pool hall.
Yeah.
As opposed to teaching you how to bowl.
Yeah. Now this next part is hard for me to say.
It's all right.
But I think it's
so we'll go into a break after this.
It's necessary, I think, for people to hear that there is recovery after things happen that you shouldn't be doing. And what happened is they were babysitting these girls, and during lunchtime, one of the girls was upstairs. She was young, and my fantasy got a hold of me because I wasn't feeling accepted. I wasn't feeling loved. Wasn't feeling any of those things. So
maybe you're even bored.
I was bored, and I acted out.
So what does that mean for people listening in? Acted out.
I touched that girl inappropriately. I didn't have sex with her or anything, but I played with her.
And was she open to that?
Yeah.
Or was she resisting?
I think she was open to that.
You know.
But she didn't. I don't think she really knew what was happening either.
All right. So she was more confused, perhaps.
Yeah, and during a change of the girl, she revealed that to the babysitter, which was my foster mom and dad. And so
she told the Keevers.
No.
The new foster mom and dad. Understood. Okay.
The new foster family. She told the new foster family that I was touching her in her privates. And
you admitted it.
Yeah, I admitted it.
Okay.
And
then what happened?
Then comes more rejection. I get sent to a psychiatric hospital for 6 months, a 6-month evaluation.
You laugh when you say that, but I'm looking at your body language as you go that doesn't seem, that seems like straight out of the dark ages.
Yeah.
That a single incident would justify a prepubescent boy getting 6 months in a psych ward.
Yeah.
I mean, if you had pulled a trigger and caused multiple people to die, if this was Sandy Hook or something like that, that seems justified. I'm not downplaying the value of that one girl's life or the trauma or the damage that came from that, but it does seem like, an overkill.
Yeah, the consequence seemed to outweigh the action. It seemed to me.
So was this was this distant, meaning could you no longer see your sister while you're in there?
Correct. I couldn't see anybody. No one would be allowed in, except after 4 months, they started allowing people to come, but no one came until the 5th month.
So things like that generate, resentments and things like that. To what kind of extent do you still have lingering effects from the resentments from that? Because we got the girl herself, the reporters, the organization, the people who you thought loved you who dropped you and didn't come see you. Yeah. You got 4 different spots I just listed where you could be resentful if you wanted to be.
Yeah, and it took a long time to overcome those resentments and bitterness that I felt towards those people that rejected me.
So for perspective's sake, how old are you today?
I'm 55 now.
So you're 55. And how long since this happened? So it's been 44 years. Just give us, again, I'm trying to give visualizations. Where in these last, 43 years and change, did you finally get over that?
Only about 14 years ago.
Yeah, so that's kind of that's the deeper message here. Resentment isn't a yes or no. It's more like a gas gauge from empty to full.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's take a break. We've been at this half an hour. We'll come right back. All right, so Kacey, you've been in the psychiatric facility for 4 months, and you have guests.
Yeah. Pretty amazing is that the Keevers came to visit me because they had just found out that I was actually in the psych ward.
Mm-hmm.
And so they came and visited all the time. And one time during the psych ward, I remember this specifically because the hospital staff allowed us to make a dinner for all the parents.
Oh.
And so I got to make spaghetti for the Keevers.
It's amazing you still remember what you cooked.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember precisely putting a bay leaf in there. So I don't know why that just clicks in my memory. It's a good memory, I guess, because I recall it so vividly. It's just amazing that I can remember that detail through all the other stuff that I had been dealing with, during my stay there. But so after those last couple months in the psych ward, I was released, and the Keevers took me back into their home as their foster son, and I felt accepted, felt loved, and Keevers were a devout Christian family,
and so you're 12 by now, right?
Yeah, I just turned 12.
Okay.
And so we were going to a Foursquare church. Matter of fact, it was East Hill Foursquare Church.
Positive memories?
Yeah, Pastor Ted Roberts from that started Pure Desire wasn't the pastor there yet, but he became the pastor of that church later on. So
okay. So we're going to start that transitioning to Pure Desire and things like that, but I feel like I want to tie up some loose ends here on this the traditional education model. So you're 12. You've got permanent foster parents. Now, of course, your last name you've adopted their last name. They've adopted you into their family. Take us through that remainder of the adolescence.
Yeah. Well, during our going to church at East Hill Church in Gresham, Oregon, we had a youth group there called the Carpenters Union, and I even remember the song, the Carpenters Union song, that we had come up with as a group, and but that church is the first church that really I felt accepted at, and I received the baptism of the Holy Spirit and got baptized in water at East Hill Church. So that was a good transition for me.
How old were you when that happened?
Well, I was 13.
Okay.
Yes, I was in junior high group, and it was really good for us. But then
Who's us? You and your sister?
My sister and I. Well, no, my sister was not with us yet.
Okay.
She didn't come until I was adopted at 13. When I was 13 years old, was when she came to be with us again, and then she finally got adopted when she was 13, like a couple years later when I was 15. So
so good memories at this church.
Yeah, good memories at that church. And we had my parents decided to go away from that church and be part of a church plant from that church into a different location in the city. And so we moved as a family with them. So there was probably maybe 20 people that moved to start this new church in like Clackamas, Oregon, which is a small suburb of Portland. And so we started out in a motel, and then we moved to a school, and then we built a building. And so that progressed pretty quickly. And during that time, I was attending the youth group and just growing in the Lord. But I still had all these things from my past that nobody knew about. You know?
Sure.
But my mom, my adopted mom, was required after taking me in as a foster kid again after the psychiatric ward to take me to counseling sessions for like a year.
When you say take you, does that mean she sat in the lobby while you had counseling, or was she
Yes.
sitting in the sessions?
No, she had to sit in the lobby while I was having counseling.
Okay.
And I think
Was that helpful in retrospect?
it was actually, I got to talk about some of my experiences growing up with that counselor. And my foster mom at the time was in a few of those sessions, but not all of them. But the one thing that I really took away from that, and this wasn't a Christian counseling at all, but the one thing I took away from it was a tape that she had given me for relaxation. And it was just, tensing up certain parts of your body for 15 seconds and then slowly relaxing them. And then that would help me in the evening times to just really wind down myself and to really focus on my breathing and that kind of thing.
Do you still do any of that today?
I still do. Yeah.
It's awesome. That's what counseling's about. It's about lifetime preparation stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And every once in a while when I'm feeling tense or I can't sleep, that's what I do. As I tense up the muscles one at a time, and then I tense them all up at the same time.
Well, I had a counselor that taught me some breathing lessons that I can still use. He recommends them at the start of the day for parallel reasons. It's like a prophylactic more than it is first aid.
Yeah. Wow.
Think of it that way. So, you know how a pearl, how an oyster works when it creates a pearl, right? The core of what a pearl is a piece of grit, dirt, something that really caused problems. And the only response the oyster has, since it can't just remove it without help, is to keep wrapping layer and layer of protective substance around it that prevents it from affecting the rest of the body. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, that's how sex works. We have these experiences, and instead of we actually replicate oyster-like behavior. And that we keep insulating it from the rest of our lives. I know my wife has called me a sexual agnostic before, so I take sexuality and try to segregate it from the rest of who I am. So throughout high school, did you have some of that?
Yes, I did, and I was still in masturbation quite a bit, and by then, looking at magazines, whenever I could get them.
Yeah, at our age, that was we didn't have Wi-Fi and things
right.
like that.
Yeah, so. Yeah. We had the magazines and I was trying to.
That was all secretive, right? No one knew about it.
No. And that was when I was living in my the basement.
So how did you get the magazines into the basement?
Kind of by myself. Yeah, I would just put them in my book bag, and just take them down.
Well, how did you get them in your book bag? The reason I ask is people want to know these kinds of things.
Yeah, well, actually, I'd either find them at a friend's house.
Whatever that means, right?
Yeah.
And then or
I would go buy one.
Sure. And the people at the stores generally don't enforce age rules.
Yeah, they didn't. And so that became a pretty long habit. But
so how much of your wealth, if you want to even call it wealth, were you pouring into that habit?
It's hard to say. It's probably...
Did you have a paper route and you spent 50% of your paper route on...
I did have a paper route. And
just for the record, I didn't know that. That just came out. It was a guess.
I did have a paper route for quite a while, but normally we would not spend it on stuff like frivolous things like that. We would go to the fast food or to the convenience store and buy junk food. So,
all right then.
Another indulgence.
Sure.
That I would do. Mm-hmm. And during the high school years, I tried to make a name for myself in sports. And
what was your go-to? What was your sport?
Well, I was a 4-year letterman in 3 sports, and so football, track, and baseball, and golf and wrestling. So
because a lot of this podcast has to do with athletic stuff, what did you? What position in football was yours? What did you play?
I played fullback and middle linebacker, or roving linebacker.
So you were literally the decision maker,
and the punter and the kicker.
Okay, well those aren't decision makers as much, but that for sure is. And I know because my kid was a punter and a kicker.
Yeah.
And you said baseball, right?
Yeah.
What position did you play there?
Catcher and second base.
Okay, well, second base is a very explosive position. You truly have to go from stop to full throttle
Yeah,
as fast as possible, often.
yeah. And during summer league, I played outfield. That was during high school. High school, I played infield, and in the summer, I would play for the.
So how, in what
Babe
ways
Ruth.
did it, your because you obviously had an addiction to sport concurrent with all that. How did that help or harm your addiction to sex?
It actually helped because I would, especially when I was doing wrestling, because that required a lot of conditioning. Because for football season, I would gain weight.
Sure.
I'd be up to 190, almost 200 pounds, and then I'd get down to 168-pound class for wrestling. So
Okay. So that kind of fits the addictive model because you were going to extremes.
yeah, definitely was. And all the while, I'm still in church. I'm still, even when I was a junior and a senior in high school, I went to 6 proms, with all these different girls, and I was considered a good date.
Because
I was spending good money. I'd rent a limo and spend money on these girls, and none of them. Actually, I could say that none of them ended up in sexual relationships. I was just at that time in my life when I was a junior and senior in high school. I was really involved in church and involved in missions trips and on the drama team and part of the worship team.
So that's fascinating you say that because a lot of people perceive that sexual addiction is very linear in its progression. It starts with magazines. The next thing you know, it's kiddie porn, right? That's kind of the perception, or flashing people or something like that. But the idea in the middle that it's oscillatory, meaning it's like a sine wave going up and down, most people don't understand that. So the idea that you had these crazinesses early on and then all of a sudden they just went away because you were a nice guy on a date,
Yeah.
that whole imagery is completely bogus, and it makes everything ununderstandable to the outside world.
It was, and I was dating a girl at the time, and I told her that I wasn't a virgin, because I had, in my high school years, I had probably my first time I had sex was when I was 16. I was a sophomore, and the girl I was dating at the time was a senior, and that was my first experience in the back of my parents' car on a top of a mountain somewhere, and
So for I mean, we need to say this because it's on the chopping block, our current culture. Define what it meant for you to have sex at 16, because we have made this very blurred. So what was it?
it was just
I mean, it traditional.
a fantasy coming true.
So you were visualizing somebody else, some other thing at the time.
No, but she was. We were the same age.
Sure.
I was, because I was held back a year,
Remember that? Mhm.
and so we were the same age. I was 16. She was a senior, and she was 16, and I just.
It's a tough story.
It felt like nothing I'd ever felt before, and I didn't think it through all the way because there was consequences.
Yeah, talk about those.
It was guilt. I had a lot of guilt for a long time.
You went back to church not long
and-
thereafter.
That relationship with that girl didn't last. It was just a purely sexual thing, and there was no intimacy.
That's interesting. At a young age, you were already able to determine that sex and intimacy can, in fact, be separated. Oh, by the way, there's a cost.
Yeah.
So you'd already had the hardcore experience with that truth at a young age.
Well, and going back to my girlfriend, she told me that I told her about my indiscretions, and then she said, "Well," because I was thinking about getting married, and she just said, "Well, I don't think I could be with anyone that has
He's not a virgin.
is not a virgin." Yeah, and then 2 years later, after we had broke up, 2 years later, she had sex with some guy and got pregnant before she got married. So,
Yeah, the games that we get stuck playing with ourselves and with others, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
So progress through these now. So you're your athletic, whatever have you, does it end in high school or do you keep going beyond?
No, I got scholarships actually to go play football and wrestling.
Where?
Stanford and
Stanford, like in Northern California, Stanford?
Yeah, Northern California,
so
Stanford.
Pac-12, so Power 5 schools.
Yeah, and I also had a scholarship to Linfield College, which was in Oregon. And but I didn't do that because, I never really liked doing homework. So instead, I went in the Army.
Okay.
And right out of high school, I went right into the Army and served my country for
so this would
6
be
years.
like from 85 until 91, is that right?
86 until 92. Yeah.
Okay. And so, again, we could do an entire show just about sexual addiction and how it looks in the Army.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I was National Guard, so I was a weekend warrior.
Okay.
And then 2 weeks in the summer. But yeah, it didn't stop, even in the National Guard on the 2 week.
So that noise in the background is thunder. We have a thunder and lightning storm passing over the area right now. So sorry about that.
Yeah. So I don't know, just being in. I was working as a welder. That was my occupation in the Army National Guard. I was a welder, and so I just became natural. And I actually learned welding from my adopted dad, Jim Keever, and I learned a lot from him. And it's amazing how much influence he has on my life, even today.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's the way the system's supposed to work, by the way.
Yeah,
that's the whole architecture of it all. So let's take the window of time when you were in the National Guard. So you had this microscopic, basic training period, and then you immediately went to the 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer, right?
Yeah.
What else were you doing then?
Like I said, I was working at this machine shop doing welding and learning how to weld from a really excellent.
Were you still living with
welder.
the Keevers?
Yeah, still living with the Keevers, and we were working. I was working so many hours. We were working double shifts because our machine shop supported the local lumber mill. So
and lumber mills 24/7.
Oregon is a huge producer of lumber, and so we were working 16 hours a day, and so I'd go home and get a few hours of sleep, and then come back. And on one of those days, actually 2 of those days, I almost got in an accident. One of them,
you were too fatigued or something?
Yeah, I fell asleep at the wheel, and I hit the guardrail on the right side, and woke up and shot back into the lane. But if I would have fell asleep 2 seconds earlier, I would have went into the ravine.
Oh, sure.
So God totally had his hand me on that one. And then another one, I fell asleep on this old back highway. This is like 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm driving to work, and I'm 19 years old, and in this Audi Fox, and I didn't have my seatbelt on, fell asleep at the wheel on a left-hand curve, and I hit the gravel on the right side edge of the road, and I felt it and woke up, and I yanked the wheel and shot back across the other side. I hit this huge fence post and endoed my car and rolled it 3 times and landed up sideways against a tree in somebody's front yard. And the people came running out. And it's just one of those things that I had this little scratch on my cheek from my glasses. And the angels were totally holding me in that car because I got to have been tossed out so easily.
And you said you didn't have a seatbelt on, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I didn't have a seatbelt on, and God protected me. And
that's pretty cool.
that is
so throughout your storytelling,
story.
you're now mature enough to be able to look back in time and see the hand of God on your life, right?
Yeah.
When you were 19, when you got out of the car, did you think that already?
Yeah, I actually, my dad, Jim Keever, he came to pick me up. This is like 5 o'clock in the morning. That people called, because I didn't have a cell phone back then.
Sure.
My boss had a cell phone, but it was one of those big ones, you know.
The car phones, the bag, yeah.
And he came and picked me up, and I said, "Hey, just take me to work." And I got to work, and the boss said, "No, Kacey, go home. You're just in a wreck. You got."
Yeah, he doesn't want you running.
Yeah.
200 amps worth of current on a stick. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Sure.
So he told me to go home, and that was a great experience working at that place and just being around those people. Eventually, I moved. The head welder at that shop moved and started his own business, and I moved with him to start with the business as a welder with him. So
let's jump into some other addictions at the time, because this is about addiction, even though sexual addiction is the thing that you and I share together. What other addictions started rearing their head in your life?
Yeah, probably when I was 21, a friend of mine took me out, and it was the first time I really drank and got drunk. Mm-hmm. And so I liked that feeling.
You know, if it started this conversation after hearing about your initial experiences with heroin and sex, and they gave me a multiple choice test and said, what age did Kacey first get drunk? And D was 21, I never would have picked D.
Right.
I would have picked something more like 11 or 13 as your first age.
No. 9 was when I started smoking pot.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually my parents, my second stepdad and my mom got me a lid of pot for my 9th birthday. And
so at that time, was it legal in Oregon at that time?
No, it wasn't legal. And
what was your response when they gave it to you? Were you thankful, confused? What did you say?
I was thankful and confused, but they helped me smoke it.
So 9-year-olds.
They got me a corncob pipe, and I had smoked so much that I had dry heaves really bad. And my whole chest became black and blue from breaking all the blood vessels in my chest.
From just all the vomiting.
Yeah. And they took me to the hospital, and I forgot about this, but they had taken me away from my parents for a season, for like 4 months.
Because of that.
Mm-hmm. That was like, that was when I was 9.
So this is the interesting part about addictions. Even with that experience with pot, did you ever smoke it again?
Once or twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
isn't that crazy? Even after that, it's like even after you've burned your hand, almost charred it on a stove, you still end up putting your hand back on now and then. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, I did. And I never did try heroin.
That's good.
But there's a story behind that too. My mom called me Hawkeye because I was always in the car to look out for cops while they were going to score their next fix. And one time they, just going back real quick, they left my sister and I at the corner store, gave the store owner $5 and said, "Hey, can you guys give these guys some ice cream?" And they went and did their drug deal. That's why I learned that later, but they went and did.
I can't imagine that today.
Yeah.
Today they'd charge at least $50 for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right. So we're only basically, through your youngest of years, and we've got some gaps to fill in here, and there's a lot of addiction monologue in the ongoing season. So let's go through. Let's kind of fast forward a bit through your relationships with women and all things associated with sex from that post joining the National Guard, forward. Mm-hmm. Take us through that.
Well, I think before I met my wife.
And how old were you when that happened?
27.
Okay.
My brother and my sister and my other sister were already married, had kids and all that stuff, and I'm the oldest, and didn't have a girlfriend really. I had girlfriends, but nothing really serious. And
you had the hot Texas Pete hot sauce, but you didn't have the actual taco.
The girlfriend that I was talking about earlier that wouldn't accept that I wasn't a virgin, she was one I wanted to get married to. And that was when I was like 22, And so I had a few other girlfriends after that, but nothing really serious. And mostly one night stands, a lot of one night stands. Probably, God reminded me of all the ladies that I took advantage of. And the list was, before I got married, was probably 10 women, 10 girls. And, since then, I won't go into what I did to make amends with those girls.
Absolutely not. You don't have to.
But I did do that. And I wrote them each a letter, just apologizing for taking advantage of them. And
So for those who don't know, it's part of the act of healing from, or we call it recovering, but it's this route we agree to get on. It's more like an escalator than it is like an elevator. But part of what we have to do is take a stare at our past, take ownership of it, and then try to do something to make things right, unless the act of trying to make things right stirs up something that makes the other person injured all over again.
yeah,
So sometimes we just write letters and we never deliver them.
correct. And that's what I did. I wrote letters and read them to a friend that I was in accountability with. And
I've done the same thing.
then then I burned them. So, but that was a time in my life where I was exploring what the possibility would be to be with these different ladies. And there was a class that my college age group was offering called Healing for Damaged Emotions. And I was like, that's probably something I could use, because I had lots of damaged emotions growing up. And but we had a college age group of 300 people, and they would only take 10 for this class. And so my girlfriend at the time, I was thinking about, she already had a kid, and I was thinking about asking her to marry me. And so we decided that I would take this class. And we tried to do it together, but they wouldn't let couples into the class. So I did it first, and that's where I met my current wife, in that group for Healing for Damaged Emotions.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so it was just one night. There are 10 of us. And a side note, my wife Dawn, she didn't really go to our church full time. She was attending another church, but came to our college age group. And they didn't really let people go to this class unless you were under the teaching of the church. But for some reason, the Holy Spirit directed them to have her in this class. So her being in that class was a miracle. And then halfway through the class, we had a night of worship, and I heard her voice, and she was a good singer, and I like singing, and also found out that she played guitar, and I play guitar, so we had some things in common. And so I cut it off with the other girl, and I started seeing this girl, but they wouldn't let us date during the class.
Sure.
Because we're sharing our most intimate things and deepest sins that we've done, for our damaged emotions. And so that's where I met my wife, was in a Healing for Damaged Emotions class. And my wife and I have actually taught that class together to high school kids at our church. So it's been something that we've been able to bring from our past and help other people.
Wow. So let's switch away from sexual addiction, but stay on addiction. Let's talk about your alcohol addiction. So you're married,
Yeah.
and for the most part, you felt good about the outcomes of your life, right?
Yeah.
And then talk us through what happened after. Talk us through the alcohol addiction, where that came from, and what happened.
Well, we were living in Oregon at the time, and we had this volatile situation, so we had to move in with our my sister and her husband. We moved into their basement.
So just you and your wife.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just my wife and I. And
Back in the basement again. What is up with you in the basement?
I don't know. And that's where I kind of found out with the porn magazines.
So your wife didn't know at this time that She had
No,
porn stash. Or did she?
no, she didn't know. And
How long had you been married at that point?
And this is the attic is stupid. 1 year.
Okay.
I've been married a year, and I'm hiding porn underneath the mattress of our bed in the basement of this house.
That you're supposedly
Yeah,
the wedding bed is not defiled kind of
Yeah.
bed. Okay.
exactly right.
So holy guilt, Matt, man.
It's terrible. And we anyway, my wife was making the bed one day, and she's tucking the sheets under, and she felt something, and she grabbed it, and she approached me with it. And I wasn't stupid enough to deny it because she had it right there. In her
Well,
hand.
I would be. I'm known to be stupid enough to try to get around that thing.
And
Not that we ever had that experience.
I didn't know
but
how
still.
that got there. Yeah, I've done that before too. Yeah, but my brother-in-law was a pastor, and so my wife confronted me about it, and I said, "Yes, you're right. I have a problem with looking at pornography and masturbating to it, and so my brother introduced me to a book called Every Man's Battle, and that was the first book that I read, and God really helped me through that time.
Let's go back.
stopped.
The first book you ever read, that is a contextual statement. Was that first book you ever read on this topic?
On this topic,
Okay.
yes, yeah, first book, and but
Because some people would say, oh, well, that's why he joined the Army instead of taking a Stanford scholarship because he's never read a book.
yeah, no, I've read
Okay,
lots.
I'm glad
of
I
books,
asked.
but I didn't like reading. But in this book, I did do the work, and my brother-in-law really walked me and talked me through the healing process and getting over this issue of sexual addiction. And so I walked through that.
With who'd you walk through it with?
With my brother-in-law,
Okay.
who was a pastor, and so probably 6 months after that, my wife and I both felt called to help a church plant. I had been through it before as a youngster, but my wife and I decided to move with 18 other people from our church in Clackamas, Oregon, to Charlotte, North Carolina. So we took this big caravan across the United States, and we moved here in 1998. And I was working in construction as a superintendent for the first year, and then got a project manager job, and then eventually.
And those things played a role in the alcohol?
Not so much, but probably after the fourth job of a project management position, that company was a party company, and that's how they rewarded their guys, was by taking them out on a binge drinking, vacation kind of. We did that my first time with that company. We went to Canada to ride snowmobiles in Ontario, and they got me drinking, and I never really looked back. I just kept drinking, and then after
So when you say drinking 3 times in a row, that's a time frame statement. What are we talking about? How long? Like years, months, decades? How long did you drink?
Probably about 10 years total. But at first it was just, every once in a while with dinner or something. But
Sure.
when I got to this company, I started drinking like crazy because that was their culture.
Sure.
That's what they did, and that's how they rewarded their guys, was by taking them there. And I would be working out of town for months at a time, and found myself in Fayetteville working.
Arkansas or North Carolina?
North Carolina.
Okay.
Fayetteville, North Carolina. And
It's pronounced Vietnam.
oh yeah, Vietnam.
Okay.
Found myself drinking like crazy at night, going to the strip clubs and all this stuff, and lying to my wife about our ATM card that I told her that got stolen, and lying straight to her face, and just because
Yeah, that's a hardcore component of addiction.
yeah. And it wasn't till years later that I finally confessed that to her, and it took a lot of healing. But let's back up and go into after that. I worked this.
So after what?
After working at that party company, I worked for another company, managing millions of dollars of work and making great money, and but working a lot of hours. And like the Ritz-Carlton was one of the jobs I was on. The View, which is 54 stories of condos in uptown Charlotte, and Ashton South End's big apartment complex, and our condominiums, and all kinds of different jobs. And that's when my drinking took a step up. And I would be drunk on the job before 9 o'clock in the morning.
Did other people know?
I'm sure people could smell it on me, but they might have thought it's a hangover from the previous night. But my drinking started at 6 in the morning and until noon, basically. And it would be 7 and 7, basically, was my choice. And I'd fill up a 32-ounce cup halfway up with Crown Royal or something, and then the rest would be Coke. And that just became a habit. And excuse me, I came home one night and kind of collapsed on the bed and basically passed out. And my wife had just had enough. And so I got a wake-up call the next morning. And she said, you either get help or get out. And so
how long ago was this?
That was about 14 years ago.
Okay.
And so 13 years ago. And that kind of changed my perspective of what I could lose if I continued down the same path.
Did you ponder how to put life together without your wife before you made the decision? Or did you just immediately make the decision, I don't want to put life together without my wife?
Yeah, I made that decision right away. I didn't. A few weeks prior to that, I went to a church building meeting. I was on the church building committee. We were building the new building for Joy Church. And I came into a meeting after drinking 10 24-ounce beers. And I thought it was fine,
No one said anything?
I smelled like a brewery,
Of course.
And my words were a little slurry, and the pastor's like, something wrong with Kacey? And Tom Beeman, my partner, he was there with me, and he knew exactly what it was. He's been there, done that kind of deal. And he approached me the next day, and so I had to make amends to the pastor and all the staff there at the church, and that was a hard thing to do. And but 2 weeks later, like I said, my wife said, you either get help or get out. So I decided to get help, and I went through this time of counseling called RTF, which is Restoring the Foundations. And that really, within that one session, it was 3 days of 4-hour sessions. And they really got to the root of an issue. And they prayed over me. They broke the
bond
of alcoholism in my life. And I just had no desire to drink after that.
So it's interesting. They broke the bond. So, much of what the secular world teaches us, and they have, ample literature to reference here, is that there's typically a multiphasic approach that has to be taken for somebody to break an addiction of a controlled substance. Alcohol's a controlled substance, right?
Yeah.
You didn't have that experience. Yours was ready, fire, aim.
Yeah, mine was like, it got completely cut off, ran away. And I didn't have another drink for like 12 years after that. And that totally changed my whole life. And I got into recovery group with Tom. Basically started a new recovery group for me. And it kind of took off.
Let's
from
talk
there.
about that because that's that group that you just described. That's where I met you.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where I met your Tom, and which led to you listening to a previous podcast, which led to you being here today to do all that.
Yeah.
So let's take some moments now and let's talk about what's a recovery group and how does it work. And you can get real specific on yours, but for the high level people in the world, kind of cover out this is why they exist and this is how they work.
Yeah, the recovery group for me started out as doing what I'm supposed to do so that other people will be okay with me, So I didn't go for myself at first. At first, I went.
There's a people-pleasing component.
Yes, there was, and so
is that okay? Is that in retrospect? Is that okay?
It is okay. I think
so too, but I wanted to hear you say that.
For a season, I think it's okay, but after about 4 or 5 months of going to the group, I was like, you know what? I really need to take this seriously. If I want to get some freedom in my life, that's where the Holy Spirit really has to kind of bring conviction to each person that's involved. And I really got some freedom. We started off with Living in Freedom Every Day, which is an excellent curriculum.
So you went through some books or some curriculum from people who are considered experts in the field.
Yeah, that's a workbook. And that actually really started me off on the right path of getting healing. And at first, I thought recovery groups was just for, like Alcoholics Anonymous. I thought that was just for guys that struggle with alcohol. And I didn't really have that struggle anymore. Or so I thought, I struggled with other things like lust. I still struggled with lust, even though I had went through every man's battle, and but stressful things come up, and my immediate reaction is to go back to what was familiar for comfort. So that's what I would do. I would go back to fantasizing about people and masturbating, and
so it's interesting. This is on a spiritual all pause here for listeners. So at the core of addiction is actually a very natural, beautiful desire, right? The core of sex, the Song of Solomon, it's black and white that the, fantasy about his wife was a key component of those words that was written there. So to claim that fantasizing about a woman is incorrect. And that, that he fantasized about his wife, but of course we take it too far, and of course that's what happens. We have repeated instances of, people consuming wine, but it's when you consume too much or too frequently or whatever. Like wine at a wedding was a very anticipatory event, and it's throughout human history. It has nothing to do with the Bible. People do that kind of thing. Every weekend, there's not a wedding, but a lot of people get drunk every weekend, right?
Right.
And we can go on and on with these examples of places where we get extreme, and that's where all these addictions go from. There's a natural root. Like we all have a natural desire to touch and be touched. Some of us go too far. Some of us have a natural desire to be angry, and we go too far. We go too far with the whole thing. So you were mentioning before we hit the record button that you had 3 components of your personality, 3 shortcomings, you wanted to call it that, that you kind of feel were the undercurrent of all this stuff. And you ditched where they came from, which was important, I feel like, because we have to separate, because we're bigger than our life experiences, right? Go through those with people. I think people want to hear that.
Well, abandonment and rejection are 2 of the biggest ones in my life.
And you see those today still?
Yeah. I still struggle with abandonment and rejection. I'm always looking for acceptance,
Sure.
because I didn't get it. As a young boy, as a young child, I was just kind of the kid in the room. I wasn't really loved. I didn't feel loved. And my dad didn't care about my biological father didn't care about me. And I actually had to write a letter to him. we did this class during our group. We did a father wounds workshop, and it was excellent. We wrote a letter. We took a week to write a letter to our fathers, our biological fathers, and I actually had to do 3 letters because I did one to my biological father, I did one to my stepdad that I didn't like, and my other stepdad, and that physically did things to me, physical abuse and verbal abuse and emotional abuse, all that was in there. But in writing this letter to my biological father, one of the things I'd expressed some of my feelings about him not knowing who I was, about feeling abandonment, feeling rejected by him. And I don't even know if he knew I was alive. I don't know if my mom ever told him that she was pregnant. It might have been just a one-night stand with him. And, but I still had feelings. I didn't know them at the time when I was born, but, later I realized that in the womb, I was abandoned by my father. And so I wrote him a letter. I told him how I felt, that I felt abandoned, I felt rejected, I felt worthlessness. I felt like I was worthless. But at the same token, I told him that I forgave him. I forgive you for not being there. I forgive you for not being part of my life. And I thanked him for my life.
Sure.
And that just brought some freedom to myself, freedom that I hadn't had in a long time. And that probably happened.
Yeah, you're underscoring one of the fundamental themes of the Christian experience, this concept that we had a model of forgiveness, and there's magic that occurs when we choose to forgive and not be bitter. I mean, I have examples in my life, too.
Yeah.
The places I've always struggled the most with forgiving myself. I mean, I can forgive others, I think, much, much easier than I can forgive myself when I go sideways. But I can very much be as bitter as the rest of them if you give me a chance. I know how to do resentment.
Yeah.
So others on your list here. You talked about the abandonment and the rejection. You had another one.
Yeah. The other one was worthlessness. I just felt unworthy, unworthy to be loved, because of the rejection and abandonment. I just felt like I would have to do whatever I had to do to be worthy of somebody's love. And the first example that I had of somebody accepting me, no matter what my past was the Keevers. The Keevers took me in.
They might get a chance to listen to this. It's going to be on the internet.
Yeah. And they just loved me unconditionally.
Are they still alive?
Yeah. Yeah, they're still alive. And I just was with them just before Christmas. And they just mean life to me. They mean the world to me because they took time when no one else would to love me and accept me for who I was. And they weren't easy on me. They were, my mom would be standing right over top of me, making sure I'd do my homework because I hated homework and stuff like that. That's why I went in the Army. But years later, when I was 25, I went to college and I went to a Bible college and just did a one year term, and I did well. But it's because of the Keevers in my life, that's stability, having somebody stable that would love me no matter what.
That's awesome. So I've, a common theme throughout all addicts is that if somebody really knew who I was, they wouldn't love me.
Yeah.
Sounds like you owned that.
I totally owned that for most of my life. And I've actually said that before in my life. If you really knew me, and I said this in my head all the time when I'm talking to people, if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me.
As a coach, as an employer, even though I sold my business years ago, I would sometimes get to see real people because there's a persona they all have when they're either allowing me to coach them or doing their jobs with me, and I get to see who they really are.
Mm.
And I'm so keen as to when that happens. You know, it's so important to me that when they confess or they expose something negative, that I do whatever is necessary to table my opinion of them and just love them.
Yeah.
You know, because I still remember when my father rejected me when he found out who I really was in this one moment. And you know, I'll carry that burden the rest of my days. And, you know, I've rejected my oldest son for some of the behaviors that he's demonstrated lately. You know, stuff that's just embarrassing. If I call a spade, yet the love has to still be there. It has to be there, even if you don't know how to express it anymore. Mm-hmm. So this was hopeful.
Yeah.
I feel like when we started this, you were like, oh, Lord, it's going to take a while to tell my story. Or you don't. I don't even know if it was you or somebody else that said, yeah, he's got a doozy of a story. Somebody made a reference like that. But you got it out. Now we were at it an hour and 21 minutes, 47 seconds.
Yeah.
And all that goes with it.
There's one thing, a couple of things that have really helped me get through and discover who I am in Christ. And the key has to be, for me, is the scriptures. And
do you have any that stick out with you? Because people always want to know which scripture verses mean the most.
Yeah, I mean, James 5:16 really sticks out to me.
We were just talking about that literally days ago.
Yeah.
Single-digit days ago.
Yeah.
So what is it so everybody can hear?
Confess your sins one to another and pray for each other that you may be healed.
So what does that mean to you?
It means that we have not only an obligation to share our sin with other guys. Mm-hmm. In our case, you know, we share sins with our fellow men, people that we are in accountability with. Mm-hmm. But that the healing comes when you do that. When you can share your story. And I've said this many times, that every time I share my story, my shame is cut in half.
That's pretty cool.
And that just makes it so much better, knowing that the things that I have to say to somebody about my life can affect me in such a way that the shame is cut down, and then that makes it all the more powerful. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm sharing my story with guys in a group setting, or I shared my story in front of all the men of our church, and I've shared my story in front of our whole church before. And every time I've done it, the shame has just been cut down, and it makes me that much more bold to share it with other guys to get them help. And in that verse, confessing our sins one to another, it really means to me deep down in my heart that as long as I am doing my part to expose the issues of my life to the light, that God will bring the healing that I need.
Mm-hmm. And you've got some evidence for it. Like your outcome today, this wasn't on the script.
No.
When you were 20 thinking, where am I going to end up? This wasn't on your script.
Totally not at all. And now I've been leading a Pure Desire group for men, doing all kinds of different curriculums from Pure Desire, whether it's Conquer Series or 7 Pillars for Men, or some of the Doug Weiss material. And
Doug, I'm sorry. I told him what your name was, and he still got it wrong.
Yeah, Doug Weiss has been very influential in helping me be an overcomer in this area of porn addiction and any addiction, really.
Cool.
Can help. And recovery groups, there's not a bad group out there. There's just some better than others.
Good summary.
And I think our group is one of those ones that are better than others, because we take time to be more personal, and we're not so structured that we can't allow a person to express themselves in the group, you know.
So at the bottom of the screen here, you're going to see some contact information for the church and the group that Kacey leads with Tom, in case any of you are interested in your local to Charlotte area. There'll be a couple of other resources on the screen for people who are looking for some more help and some guidance. And thanks for being on the show.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks, Jeff, for having me.
You're welcome.